Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really plunging into the world of soybeans. It's this huge global commodity, right? Underpins so much of our food system, but honestly, it often flies completely under the radar. So our mission here is to take your sources, specifically this outlook on soybean supply and price for insect farmers, and really connect the dots for you. We'll look at the big trends, staggering production numbers, the complex trade stuff, and figure out what it all means for you, especially if you're involved in or thinking about alternative proteins like insect meal.
Yeah, we're aiming to give you a shortcut to getting really well informed on this, maybe uncover a few surprises too. Okay, so global commodities. Soybeans are just immense. The scale is kind of mind-blowing. Latest forecasts, we're talking a projected record for the 2025-26 season, around 427 million metric tons globally. Just think about that. Production has more than doubled in just the last 2 decades. It's incredible growth. And a lot of that, a huge chunk, is coming from South America. Brazil, for instance. They're expecting a bumper crop, maybe 175 million tons.
And they're likely to account for, something like 59% of world soybean exports in 2025-26. Just massive. Plus, global ending stocks, that's the leftover soy, they're projected to edge up slightly to about 124.3 million tons. It really sounds like we're swimming in soy, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
A colossal amount. And, what's interesting about these really robust supply figures, especially that uptick in ending stocks, is that they do signal a pretty significant degree of stability in the market, at least for the near future. But, and this is key, while that sounds good for overall food supply, this abundance can actually make it a bit more challenging for newer protein sources to really gain traction quickly. When the main supply seems plentiful, the economic pressure to find alternatives, it might just be lower. It sort of raises the bar for cost competitiveness, for any new player coming in.
That's a really crucial point. Okay, so we've got this huge volume of soy. Where does it all actually go? What does the supply mean for consumption? This is where it gets fascinating, I think. The vast majority, somewhere between 63% and 70%, and yeah, some studies push that even higher, maybe 80%. It's fed directly to livestock: poultry, pigs, cattle, fish. It's like the hidden engine powering our meat, eggs, and dairy. Compare that to direct human consumption. It's surprisingly small, only about 7 to 10% of the total crop. But then you have this other trend, right? The rapid rise of plant-based foods. That industry leans heavily on soy. It's growing fast, like 7-8% a year. Projected to hit, around $19 billion market value by 2028? Think tofu, soy milk, all those meat alternatives you see everywhere now.
Exactly. And that highlights this really interesting interplay. You've got these two big forces. On one hand, yes, animal feed absolutely commands the lion's share, no question. But on the other, the rapid growth in plant-based foods, that's a really noteworthy and consistent growth area. Even though it's still a smaller piece of the pie overall, this trend definitely adds incremental demand pressure. And it also signals, I think, a broader shift in consumer thinking about protein sources, which, long term could start to tighten the supply at the margins for other uses. It's definitely a dynamic, the whole protein supply chain, including insect protein folks, needs to watch closely.
Absolutely. And look, you really can't understand the global soy market without talking about China. You just can't. Their role isn't just big, it's the critical swing factor. China is, by a huge margin, the world's biggest soybean buyer. They imported roughly 112 million tons in the 2023-24 season. Let that sink in. That's about 62% of all global soybean imports. And yeah, most of that, as you'd guess, feeds their enormous hog and poultry industries. Now, this import dependence has some serious strategic implications. Just think back to the U.S.-China trade war, remember? 2018 to 2020. Beijing slapped tariffs on U.S. soy. American exports to China plummeted. And Brazil, they stepped right in to fill that massive void. So it just shows how any future tariff issues or, geopolitical friction could totally disrupt global soy flows again. It's like this giant global chess game playing out, isn't it? And China's even signaled publicly that they plan to reduce soy meal in animal feed. They're targeting, I think, 10% inclusion by 2030, down from maybe 13% or so today. The official reason is to cut back on needing so many imports. Makes sense. But here's the thing.
So far, Chinese demand isn't really showing signs of slowing down much. In fact, imports actually hit record levels last year, which naturally makes everyone wonder, are they just stockpiling? Analysts point to this gap, right, between what China says it uses in feed versus the huge amounts it's importing. It hints that maybe the extra imports are quietly padding state reserves. And here's a little detail. Apparently, China might prefer U.S. soybeans for stockpiling. Lower moisture, they store better than Brazilian beans. We even saw some evidence of this tactical stockpiling. Chinese buyers rushed to lock in deals late last year, apparently ahead of expected new U.S. tariffs.
hmm And this really brings up a key question, doesn't it? Is China's buying driven purely by what they need right now for consumption? Or is there a big chunk of strategic hoarding mixed in? That gap you mentioned between reported use and imports, plus that tactical buying, it makes China this crucial but also kind of opaque factor. You can't always tell what's driving their behavior. But their actions, whether it's for feed today or reserves for tomorrow, they can seriously sway the global market, create unexpected demand spikes. And, for anyone in alternative proteins, China's saying they want to cut soy meal use, even if it's slow going. That's a really strong long-term signal. They are looking to diversify feed sources.
Right. So with all these moving parts, supply, demand, China's big play is what about the price? That's the bottom line for many. We all remember that spike back in 2022. Prices hit decade highs, around $14.20 a bushel. Well, that was driven largely by China rebuilding its hog herd after African swine fever, plus the wider commodity chaos from the Ukraine war. But since then, things have cooled off a bit. Prices have started to ease. Projections now seem to show U.S. soybean prices stabilizing, maybe in the $10 to $11 per bushel range for the mid-2020s. The USDA, for instance, they're projecting about $10.25 up bushel for 2025, 26. That's roughly 375 per metric ton. So on the surface, that suggests a relatively stable, maybe predictable cost for soy-based feed, at least in the near term. But what's your take? Is it really that straightforward for buyers?
Well, it does suggest some level of stability, which is good for planning. But yeah, there's always a but, isn't there? The crucial thing to remember is the inherent supply chain risk. It's concentrated. The world really relies heavily on just a few key exporters: Brazil, the US, Argentina. That's basically it. So any localized problem, a bad drought in one region, farmers shifting crops because fertilizer costs spiked, even just port congestion, it can ripple globally fast and impact prices. And as we discussed, trade friction remains this huge wild card. A sudden tariff fight, maybe an unexpected export ban from one of those big three, that would tighten supply almost overnight and definitely drive up costs for feed buyers everywhere. And connecting back to China, if their stockpiling suddenly ramps up more than expected, or if their plans to cut soy use kind of stall out, we could easily see unexpected demand surges putting upward pressure on those prices again. So stable, but with caveats.
Okay, so wrapping this all together, after digging into the huge scale, the demand drivers, China's massive influence, the price picture, and its risks, what does this actually boil down to for you, the listener, especially if you're in the insect protein space? Well, think about it like this. Soy is the benchmark, right? It's the main protein in most conventional feed, so its price and how readily available it is that directly shapes the economic space, the competitiveness for alternatives like insect meal. If soy prices stay kind of moderate like projected and supply feels abundant, then yeah, conventional feed makers might feel less immediate pressure to look for substitutes just based on cost. But, and this is the important part, the flip side is also true. Any future soy shortfalls or big price spikes, maybe from trade shocks, maybe growing sustainability worries about soy farming, maybe just unexpected demand, that could really open the door much wider for insect protein to complement soy, or maybe even strategically replace some of it in feed rations. It's really about being prepared for those potential shifts.
Precisely. Staying on top of these soy market fundamentals. It's not just interesting, it's actually crucial for positioning insect protein effectively. Understanding the subtleties of global soy supply, the pricing, anticipating those potential bumps in the road, that's what helps you make the case that your products are reliable, cost-effective, and frankly, really valuable parts of the feed picture moving forward. It's about being seen as part of the solution in this evolving landscape.
So the main takeaway seems to be soy looks pretty plentiful for now. That creates a landscape that's fairly stable, but also, yeah, pretty competitive for all protein sources.
Exactly. And that really leads to, I think, an important final thought here. Prudent risk management, diversification. These are just smart strategies, and that absolutely includes embracing and developing alternative proteins like insect meal. The feed industry is constantly adapting to this changing global protein situation.
Yeah.
And given how unpredictable geopolitics can be and the increasing volatility from climate change, having multiple resilient options for feed ingredients, it's just more critical now than ever before.
So here's something to think about as we wrap up. How do these big global shifts in agriculture trade driven by market forces and by political strategy, how do they create not just challenges, but maybe also some surprising opportunities for innovation all across the protein supply chain? Definitely something to chew on.